Hey, hello everybody and welcome back to episode 2 of the Supercharging Engineering webinar series brought to you by Persistent Systems. Thank you very much for being with us today. We do appreciate your time. I'm Carl Mulcahy and I'm delighted to be back as your host for episode 2. And today we're discussing our ELM or Engineering Lifecycle Management version 7 readiness assessment, which is made up of our health checks and updating of the versions. So, picking up from where we left off last time, we talked a bit about the new functionality, performance, and even user interface enhancements that were introduced with IBM ELM version 7. And in today's session, we are discussing how we can help you adopt the new version and make the most of the new enhancements, especially the performance that have been talked about previously. With some customers having adopted ELM, or formerly CLM as it was known then, solution since version 4, a lot has changed since then, and often topologies and deployments haven't adapted with the demands of the users. So as we develop these tools on behalf of IBM, we know them very well and therefore know how to get the best out of them. So that's the thought behind today's session. And today we're going to be diving into how we can streamline deployments and improve operational efficiency and even introduce cost savings utilizing our version 7 readiness assessment. So as a reminder, today's session is part of an ELM subtopic within the Supercharging Engineering series. You can see the full schedule and register for future sessions using the same link to register for this one. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to do so, register for the future sessions. And also, if you didn't manage to join us for the previous session on an ELM version 7 overview, you can catch up with that as Matt is highlighting on the slide now. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleagues, Matt and David, Matt Bradshaw and David Chadwick from our expert technical team. They'll be taking us through today's session. But just before I hand over and they kick off, I do need to mention a few housekeeping announcements. All participants will be on mute throughout the webinar and we will be recording the session. If you do not agree, you may disconnect at any time. There will be the website to view at a later stage to rewatch or share with your colleagues. If you have a question, please use the Q&A or chat window in the WebEx portal and address this to all panelists so we can address them either at the time or at the end in the allotted Q&A time. If you wish to elaborate on your question, we can unmute your line if required. You can make the screen bigger using the buttons that appear when hovering your mouse on the left-hand side, and also resize the WebEx window as required. However, due to increased global demand on the WebEx platform, should you have any audio difficulties, please consider dialing in for the audio. Numbers can be found in the chat window or in the reminder email that you were sent prior to this session starting. Please ping me or any of the team on the webinar if you have any difficulties, but bear in mind the session will be recorded. Okay, well that's me done in terms of the introduction. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Matt and David. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. So yeah, as Carl alluded to, my name is Matthew Bradshaw. I'm one of the solution architects, which basically means technical consultants for the IBM ELM tools. I've worked with them for kind of a little over 8 years now, with some time being spent within IBM, and the last couple of years working with Persistent and the kind of technical team that we have available to us on some of our own offerings and some of our service kind of offerings as well, which is what we're going to be looking at today around the health check and upgrades to make sure you guys can get the most of version 7. So that's what we're focusing on today. The previous replays are available, and if you do want to register for any of your future webinars in the series, the links are available on these slides that will be sent out after this session. So let's have a look into the kind of health check service and what that kind of really means. So when we speak to customers who are using the ELM tools, where we would start to think about offering the health check service, or think about something that would be useful to them, these are some of the indicators that we get from customers that would warrant a health check, really. So where customers are having lots of different tickets raised, either internally with their own IT departments that are supporting the ELM tools on little niggly issues, or potentially lots of IBM support tickets get raised on kind of point problems that they're having. And if there's kind of a growing number of these, or there's kind of a constant, fairly high amount of tickets that get raised, get kind of worked on individually with IBM or internally with IT, and then kind of get resolved, that kind of slows progress down because people are having to raise these tickets, as well as the IT department being kind of taking up their time doing and resolving these issues. So kind of that's one of the key indicators. So the other ones we kind of see really are around frustration. So the users that are using the tools on a day-to-day basis, if they're having things running slowly, things are taking a while to respond when they're trying to do their day-to-day work, that's kind of making them frustrated. They can kind of go around the different teams and kind of vent and talk about the problems, and it overall kind of leads to a user community that aren't particularly happy using the tools. So, if they're having lots of time waiting for systems to respond, they're going to decide to do things potentially outside of the tools, which can cause issues, particularly if you're doing work within compliance or audit kind of industries where they are kind of key. So, that kind of frustration can kind of really grow and kind of stop users wanting to use the tools, as well as kind of slow down their actual day-to-day work. We also see a lot of customers that kind of roll out the tools or one of the tools within the ELM portfolio initially. So we may have a customer that has rolled out the kind of requirements side using IBM Doors Next. They've kind of started off with a POC environment and kind of incremented it to have a few more resources so they can roll that out as production. But as and when they start to use the tools more and more, they start to roll out and kind of make use of the wider enterprise benefits for things like test management, model management, work tracking, and source code management. So they may start to add these products on to that initial system that they've decided to use. Maybe potentially 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's been up and running. So it's not really being used how it's designed to be used. It's kind of inorganically grown and stuff's been added onto it, which is kind of can potentially cause lots of issues. Whereas if the customer knew they were going to roll this out at the start of the project, they could have had a proper sit down and decide, this is our enterprise topology and this is the system that we need to put in place to make sure it supports our users with using all this different functionality in an integrated way. And kind of the last kind of problem that we see is the reliability side of it. So again, you don't want your users, when they get into a crunch time of the project, towards deadlines or key phases, the system being down without kind of planned maintenance. So if you're trying to get in and do something important and the system's down because for whatever reason, then that's going to again prevent you from meeting your project development timelines and timescales. And again, it's going to lead to that kind of frustrated user community, and it's not really going to help you use the tools in a fully enterprise way where you're confident with how you're using them. And that's kind of where we came up with the health check offering, really. So the high-level goal that we want to make sure comes out of the back of this is that your ELM deployment is fit for purpose. So that is kind of the first part of it, but the second kind of half of this sentence really is it needs to be fit for purpose to support the needs of your engineering teams. So we're not just going to go in and look at the kind of basic stuff like server infrastructure. We're going to speak to engineers and understand your way of working on a day-to-day basis so we can make sure that your specific use cases are covered. This isn't a cookie-cutter thing that we do for customers. We want to make sure that how you are using the tool is going to be supported. So this is a custom thing that we work with. We understand your exact usage, and then we can kind of help you make sure that deployment is up and running and working as effectively as it can be. So once we have that in place, the counterpoint to lots of the issues, you want to make sure it's available to you as much as possible. So your minimum scheduled downtime, and it should be scheduled rather than unscheduled, so the users know when it is, and it's not going to be affecting key project deliverables or key project timescales. So your users have confidence that it's going to be available to them. To work on the kind of frustration side of it, the performance needs to be up to scratch. So as a user, I can log in and do my activities in a shorter amount of time because the system is very snappy, it's very responsive. I can get the data and make the changes I need to very easily, so I can do my work in 2 or 3 hours in the system rather than having to sit and wait for it to load and different screens taking a while to generate, which may take me 4 or 5 hours to do that same level of activity just because I'm waiting for the system to respond. So again, I'm going to be happier, and it's going to mean I've got less time sat in front of the computer waiting for the system to work when I could be out doing stuff that's adding value to my project or to my kind of work that I'm involved on. And scalability is something that kind of comes from this growth that we have with customers. So again, they start off with a small part of the tools or a small project within there, and it starts to grow and grow and grow as and when the customer makes more use out of it. So again, we want to make sure that the system is scalable based on your plans. You may have new projects coming down the line or new users that are getting involved into the tools. So we want to make sure the system can support you, not just today and the way you're currently using it, but working with your future plans moving forward to make sure you can have the level of data and the level of users that you need to within the system. So looking at it in a little bit more detail then, so the rough process in terms of what we would do if we were to work with you on a health check. So we would start with some kind of initial pre-work in terms of understanding the basics, what's your current deployed topology, and how have you configured that system using the different kind of parameters and as well as the system resources that are available to it. We then start to talk about and discover your specific use case pattern. So this is the stuff that's going to be different for each customer. What are your key workflows? What are your users working on? What's taking time for them to do? What kind of data do you need to get out of the system? So really start to understand your process and your way of working with the tools, and speak to the administrators as well as the users. So the IT department or the users within your organization that need to manage the system and keep the lights on, so to speak. We want to understand what they're having to do on a day-to-day basis to keep the system up and running and what's kind of causing them issues. So that's really understanding the usage and the user side of it, as well as then looking at the actual data behind it and the metrics that we can glean from, investigating into the system. So we can pull off various metrics and reports and logs and statistics. We've got that knowledge to be able to interrogate the system and get all of that kind of raw data off the system. And we want to be doing that kind of during a varied time period so we can see how it progresses, and when you've got peak load potentially on a Monday morning or a Friday evening before everyone's trying to get stuff done before they go home for the weekend, we can understand what's happening within the system, and that's the peak usage that we want to make sure it can accommodate. And finally, once we've done all that data collection and spoke to all the users to understand the workflows, we can then go away and spend a bit of time writing our findings and the data that we've used to kind of understand what's going on, as well as our recommended actions. So this is kind of the key output that we want to give you, a list of actionable items that you can go away and kind of improve your system and make those changes to your system so you can be confident going forward. You've got the tick that the system is going to support you for your key projects or for your new users, that are being added into the system. So in terms of finding out on a user side what's happening, again, a little bit more detail on the process here. We have questionnaires and kind of forms that we can fill out in the meantime, so we can send these to you in advance of the health check actually commencing in terms of the on-site work. So your users and your admin people can fill this out to give us an initial level of, an initial impression of the system. So things like, what are your current biggest issues? How do you onboard users? And what's the system stability like? How is your interface with IBM support as well as your users support? If you're providing support for your users, and what issues can potentially be found from there. The kind of basic software deployment topologies and how are you using your applications at a kind of a very high level to give us an initial impression so we can hit the ground running when we actually come on site and start to kind of conduct the day-to-day investigation and speak to the users. So we want to speak to the project users, as I've kind of already said. We want to get a range potentially of the different projects and the different use cases that you are having within the system. And we want to make sure that we can pick some of those users that are, fairly knowledgeable of the tools. We don't want kind of the users that are kind of just stakeholders that log in to maybe review and approve something once in a blue moon. We want users that kind of on a fairly regular basis and understand the core concepts and the key functions of the system. We want to be talking to those people. And we can cover the entire domain of the tool, so all the way through from requirements modeling, planning, source code build, testing, whatever you're using. It may be the full suite, it may be a subset of that. we've got the relevant expertise to kind of provide those recommendations and understand what's going on as well. If you're looking at configuration management, either as a current usage today or a future to-be thing to move to, again, we can understand what you're trying to do with that and provide recommendations to make sure when you do make that leap to a configuration managed environment that you are confident that the system's going to be ready to go and up and running for those users. Reporting is key. This is something we've had as a result of some of our previous health checks that we've run, and we've got some more details of that coming up shortly. But the data that you need to get out for documentation or live reports and dashboards, using the various reporting mechanisms within the ELM tools, we want to make sure that you can get the best data and the quickest response basically out of the system, so you can glean those reports off as quickly as possible. And we'll also do interviews with the tool administrators to go into the more hardware side of it in terms of system monitoring and admin tasks and all that kind of data logging that we need to do as well as the actual project users. When we're collecting the data, again, we've got scripts and things that we can run just to kind of get data and access log files and things that already exist on the servers themselves, things like the OS configurations and version numbers, how you've configured your middleware, so things like the application server and the kind of database server and the potential proxy server stuff that you're using, how you've configured all that to communicate the different kind of resource parameters and ways of tweaking that to get performance improvements. We can understand and find out those to provide recommendations. Your current size of your repositories, so we can find out the data within there and the amount of database space that's taking up, as well as how that has been growing over time and projected, 6, 12 months from down the line, what's that going to look at? Have you got enough system resources and system space to cope with that, as well as the user load and resource usage. So again, peak times, we want to be looking at how many users are in the system, what's the CPU, RAM, all that sort of stuff looking like when we're looking at the admin hardware side of it to understand the system data that's being generated, so we can understand fully on the user side as well as the server side what's happening. When we actually go and produce this health check report, that will include the summary of your system deployment, the summary findings that we found from the user reviews and questionnaires that we've performed, and the data that we've collected from the actual servers themselves, our notable findings are things that may be relevant or may be of interest to you, as well as those key recommendations that you guys can carry out on your system to make sure they are your system is going to be as performant and as secure and as safe as it can be. As well as those kind of system changes. So yeah, the key thing there on the recommendations is it can be system changes, as well as things like we can tell your users to go about things in a different way so they can get better results. It might streamline the way they need to do things. So it's both the user side recommendations as well as the actual system specifications that we can tweak and refine to make sure they're as good as they can be. In terms of activities, roughly, we would do some preparation initially, which will be off remotely, with us sending the questionnaires and some initial fact-finding that we can do 1 or 2 weeks before the actual on-site visit. When we did do the on-site visit, we could spend 2, 3, 4 days potentially on-site, meeting those users, meeting the administrators to go through the interview process and get all the data that we need to. We have had cases when we've done this in the past where we've had multiple consultants on site to speed up this process. So potentially we could have 2 consultants on site to kind of get through the actual interview process in a shorter amount of time. Or potentially just have the 1 consultant doing it all, and it might take a bit more time to get through the relevant people and the relevant stakeholders. But we're flexible with that depending on what we need to do. And then again, we take all that data away and spend 2 to 4 days generally to put the report together based on what we've found. So again, I said right at the start, this is not a cookie cutter thing. We have a process and we have steps that we want to go through, but this will be different, and this will take, we can scope the actual health check before, before commencing this to make sure it's going to cover everything you want it to, and we're happy with what we've got out of it at the end of the day. So just to give you a vague idea, this could take between 1 and 2 weeks to kind of carry out and perform, so you can get those results and those recommendations out of the back of it. So why Persistent? Why should we use Persistent for this service? So Carl mentioned at the start, Persistent have the development organization for IBM. We are a traditional software development house. We develop software for IBM, Oracle, other companies of that size. And we've developed the ELM tools for the last sort of 3 or 4 years. So we have all of that development expertise. We have consultants that have been with the tools for a matter of decades in some cases. So we've got a very, very deep technical knowledge as we have the development organization as well as consultants that are very experienced with the tools. And we've started to basically enhance that development by bringing our own intellectual property, things around integrations. So again, where you may have a use case that involves third-party tools, we have expertise and we have knowledge of integrations to third-party tools that we can help you with. As well as our own professional services on things like upgrades, managed service, which we'll get onto a little bit. So basically the gist of this is we've got a great technical team available to us, and we are using this to help our customers get the most out of the ELM tools that they've deployed. As a lot of IBM employees moved over to Persistent when we started developing the tools, we kind of know how both organizations work, so we can leverage both IBM and Persistent where it needs to be. So we know how the IBM support process works. We're involved in that on a day-to-day basis, so we can help you with that IBM support process and make sure that it's all running as seamless as possible between the two. As I said, we've got over 300 development staff and senior product architects that have been with the tools for a long period of time. And we have helped customers with installation, training, best practice recommendations, upgrades, all that sort of stuff as well to make sure that the system is going to work as well as it can be for you. So yeah, we develop the tools on behalf of IBM. We've got local resources as well as kind of remote resources that can do this. So we are really invested in your ELM deployment to make sure it's working well. An example one that we've done for another customer, just to kind of show where we have done this in the past, this was a large transportation company in Europe. We have done other health checks in areas like automotive and computer equipment manufacturing. But effectively, the background, the customer wanted to improve their performance and the efficiencies within their deployment, get some best practice recommendations, and have that kind of definitive document telling them what state of their system was as well as what needs to be improved. We actually then went on to help them with some of the services and some of the recommendations. So off the back of the health checks, things like upgrades and changes were recommended to the environments, the best practice recommendations. So they actually came back to us and said, can you help us with these? And we kind of used our services team to help not only do the recommendations, but also perform the improvements as well. So we kind of helped them from start to finish on that point. And a lot of the benefits that was gleaned around this was improving workflow. So the actual system they had wasn't, was pretty well defined, but, they were going about some certain things within the system in an inefficient way that was causing delay. So we actually provided lots of recommendations around usage and some improvements again for reporting that meant they could, streamline their manual work and had some better, more optimized workflows within the tool itself. We have another use case that we'll mention a little bit later on as well, which has got some environmental changes that we've recommended, just so you can have an impression of the types of things that we would recommend off the back of that. But I have briefly talked about our services team that we have. So there's some various services that we can provide for customers, and I've highlighted some of the key ones that we would generally do off the back of an investigation into a health check, should I say. Project administration, upgrades, installations, we can actually do that for you directly on your system, be it on-site or remote. So a lot of our customers are looking at our remote installations and upgrades where security allows, because that could bring down the cost vastly. Best practice workshops as well. So it's not just about the nuts and bolts of the system, it is about the usage as well. And we are working on a number of customers with a managed service option, so we can actually just take away the headache of the system infrastructure and the managing the system on a day-to-day basis, keeping the lights on, so your users can just get on with making best use of the tools and doing their job on a day-to-day basis, the actual value add stuff, and we can do that kind of for you, so you can just the system's just managed and you don't have to worry about it. So just some highlighted things that we've potentially done, we could potentially do, and we have done for other customers that have taken a health check from us, that you may or may not decide to do with the health check. So we could potentially help you with these. If you know you want to upgrade to version 7 based on the previous webinar, then again, we can have that conversation with you to go through the planning and implement that upgrade. Last slide to mention here then, just a quick summary of it. So the health check really is to provide an assessment of your deployments. There's usage patterns, there's system deployment side of it as well. What are the difficult workflows, and we want to collect a lot of the data to help us understand what's going on. We find out that data with questionnaires, interviews, metric collection, and all that sort of stuff as well. And it covers the entire platform of tools. So IBM Doors Next, Workflow Management, Test Manager, etc. Those tools that are listed there in the middle of the middle of the PowerPoint, we can cover those. So if you use everything, great. If you only use a subset of that, we can still help you out. And the last point here, just to mention another case study we did for an automotive supplier. Again, we kind of confirmed that the infrastructure was broadly okay in terms of what they were trying to do. We provided them some recommendations to move from Design Manager, as it was, to Model Manager to get used to the new features and some of the new performance kind of enhancements from that as well. They had a reporting system they were using, or they had some reports they needed to generate, which was kind of injecting a lot of load and a lot of performance hits on the main server when the users were trying to do their activities. So again, we recommended a separate server for them to do dedicated reporting, which would take the strain away from their day-to-day users and improve the performance on that side. And very detailed kind of fine-tuning of their Oracle database performance metrics. We provided some kind of configuration changes that they could make to kind of give them a better performance of the data access, as well as some best practice recommendations for them to fix the query structures. So the data they're trying to get out, they were doing it in a slightly roundabout way, which could have been improved. So again, all around improving their users as well as the infrastructure to support that ELM deployment. So that's it in terms of slides. We've got a few minutes left. Apologies, we've slightly overrun there, but are there any other questions in the Q&A? And I've got my colleague Dave Chadwick, who's actually performed quite a few of these health checks online as well. So between us, we should be able to answer any questions that you've got.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Just to echo what Matt said, the Q&A tab is open if there are any questions. So Matt, Dave, we've had one come through about what's the difference between this health check and a deployment that is offered by IBM, the monitoring.
Dave, do you want to take that one?
Okay, yeah. Well, a deployment workshop is typically helping you plan out your deployment and make recommendations for how much hardware you're going to need, whether it's virtual or physical, and just what your ramp up of projects looks like, and so you can look ahead a couple of years and figure out what size infrastructure you need to handle that. So it's more a project-oriented look at your enterprise, and then that results in an overall recommended topology and hardware infrastructure. And so that's kind of a planning before the build out, whereas this is kind of looking at your build out that you've already done and is in production, and how is it operating now, and where are the pain points, and where can we make recommendations to make that improvement for your user base, whether it be workflows, ways of working, or whether it's in changing, making slight changes to the infrastructure. And it's based on production, real production usage in the day in the life of your user base. instead of planning for the future, which is what the workshop is about.
Okay, hopefully that answers the question. If there are any follow-ups, please let us know. We have had another question through. What are the benefits we get as a customer choosing persistent systems versus IBM? Matt, Dave, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I guess based on kind of building on the response that Dave kind of said to the last question, the kind of health check, well, it's not even a health check really, the deployment planning workshop is kind of very system orientated rather than focusing on the user side and the kind of key workflows. So that's something that, you know, your users are kind of key to this. We want to make sure it's as tailored as possible and the system is tweaked to what you need it to do. So kind of we've done this and we've kind of had this user focused approach to help you do that. We have the development team available to us on hand, so we can kind of very easily get access to that, those kind of technical resources and understand what's going on with tools. And, you know, quite simply, persistent as a services organization are generally cheaper than IBM as well. So there's a nice benefit there that our services teams that we have, you know, are a little bit cheaper than getting an equivalent IBM person to do it, but we have kind of that expertise as well.
Okay, thanks, Matt. One other question I've had come through is, you mentioned a sort of report. What sort of typical recommendations come from that? Or does it mainly depend on what the customer, you know, situation?
I'll take that. I guess from our history of doing this with multiple customers, what comes out of it is very dependent on the individual customer's way of working, and also how far or how many things might be changed in the infrastructure. In general, we find just a few tweaks to the infrastructure because they've pretty well followed the golden topologies we've recommended on jazz.net. And so if they've followed those recommendations, there's not a lot of infrastructure change necessarily unless there's a resource gap on one of the servers. But beyond that, there's usually a few pain points that have come up in the way they're using the tools that we might suggest places for investigation, finding alternative workflows that are better suited for the tool environment, but still give them the equivalent data and result that might be more performant than the way they're doing things now. So we can make some recommendations like that, which are basically areas for them to decide, do I want to spend effort in this area to try to make a difference? And so they can either, you know, hire a consulting group to help them figure that out, or they can just take it on as a tool team and try to implement changes themselves. So in either case, we give them a laundry list of what we think are the top few recommendations based on our observations of the way they're using the system.
Okay, thank you. And then the final question that's come through is, can you do ELM tool modifications to customer requirements?
Actually, tool modification is not part of this service. This is not a customization. Now, in the events of needing within the tool with no custom code, the ability to change parameters or change values that are customizable, or not really customizable, configurable within the tool set. We could obviously point you in the right direction, but that's out of the scope of a health check. It's more customization services, which we also provide to customers, more on a customized statement of work and a set of deliverables based on time and materials. So we do that kind of service, but it's just not part of the health check.
Yeah, just to add to that, the last, one of the use cases we showed where we helped them with some of the improvements that we recommended. So it's exactly that case where we perform the health check, the recommendations will be provided. The customer would then say, right, we want to do all of these, but we may be not confident or maybe don't have the time or the resources. Then we would have a further conversation to implement those as a kind of a services engagement, using some of the things that we talked about here on this slide. So yeah, it's something we can absolutely help with, but generally following on from the health check.
Okay. And then, sorry, one has come in, very final quick one. Is SQL generally recommended as a back-end database? SQL.
Dave, I'm guessing you've got a bit more experience with that.
I didn't quite catch the whole question about SQL and what else.
Is it generally recommended as a back-end database?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, basically, the way that development and testing is done on ELM, our first and largest used database that we start off by tuning at the very beginning is Oracle. And the second database that we tune and make sure works properly is DB2. And then the third one we look at for tuning and optimization is SQL Server. So it gets the least of the three in terms of a look at an initial release. We obviously play catch up and do further tuning along the way as the release gets deployed to customers and also in subsequent releases. So for instance, with a major re-architecture that's gone on in 7.0, we certainly support SQL Server in 7.0, but we have not done the level of tuning of SQL Server that we've done to Oracle and DB2. So that's just something to note, that once a re-architecture of the style that's happened in 7.0, it takes a few months or another release perhaps before we catch up with the performance tuning of the third choice database, which in this case is SQL Server.
Yeah, and
okay.
Just add quickly to that, very quickly. There's an element of performance, obviously, but there's also an element of support. So, your IT department may be a SQL shop, so that's what they know. So you need to take that into account as well, as what Dave has said. So, if we recommend Oracle or DB2, but your IT department don't necessarily know how to support it, that can cause issues as well. So there's a general, there's different things that need to be taken into account, as well as just the, raw performance of a database and how often it gets tuned. Just to add to Dave's comment there.
Well, and to finish out that, it's not to say that SQL Server is unsupported or supported to a lesser degree. It's just a timing of when the best time to upgrade to a new architecture depends on your shop, and you may want to take a few more months to wait to do the 7.0 upgrade if you're a SQL Server shop. It's just a matter of timing for your projects and your environment. And so you may want to delay that upgrade a little bit longer if you're a SQL Server shop. It is fully supported and is from the very beginning of every release GA product. It's just a matter of some of the performance edge cases may not be as fully investigated right at the GA of something like 7.0.
Okay. Look, guys, I'm conscious we're over time, but if there are any other questions, please, I mean, my details will be on the final slide. Please reach out and let us know, or alternatively contact your local persistent rep. But I just quickly echo that, in the UK, where I cover, we have worked on various of these health checks, like Matt says, some for the wider ELM solution and some for, just using EWM, Workflow Manager, or RTC as it was formerly known. And all the customers we've worked with have been very happy and, delighted with the enhancements we've introduced. So that's great. You'll see a couple of resources here, more on IBM ELM version 7, in terms of a couple of blogs and more information about our readiness service. Furthermore, there have been some other webinars we've recorded around DOORS 9.7 and the wider ELM series, in case you're not familiar with it. We have also drawn up some blogs across the industrial sector, and you can see our customer case studies as well on the bottom. These slides will be shared. This WebEx video will be, it's been recorded and will be posted on where you have registered already, as episode 1 is already available. But I just wanted to sort of turn to focus to the next episode 3 of the ELM version 7 mini series. And this is going to be a special Q&A session with the VP of Product Management from IBM and Persistence IBM Alliance President Gianni Zhang about where version 7 is going, where ELM is going, and what that means for you as end customers and systems engineering. So I'm very excited for that one, to be joined by 2 very important figures within the ELM world. And also talking about why Persistent and IBM make such a great team together and enhance customer success using ELM. So hopefully you can join us for that. You'll see the links available there to register also. My final point is just to say thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your extended time. Thank you to Matt and Dave for taking us through the content. Just after this webinar, you will be taken to the landing page where we'd encourage you to sign up to webinars if you haven't already. And yeah, so thank you again. Just like to really appreciate you joining, and please keep safe and well in these times of uncertainty. If you do think there is anything Persistent can do to help your business at this time, please let us know. And likewise, if there's anything in this webinar that has been of interest, please let us know. But thanks again. Hope to see you at the webinar next week, and take care. We'll close the call there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.